All right, we are live. Hello, Glynis.
Hi, Josh.
Welcome to the Edlow podcast, your maiden voyage in the podcast world. Right?
Yes, my
Yeah.
very first interview on a podcast.
Well, good. Well, we'll make it easy on you. You were just saying on the offline, you were like, "Oh man, I'm I'm in a podcast with a prosecuting attorney," and, and I was just saying, this is way different. This is way different than what I do for work. Just because when I depose people, I have a sense of where I want things to go, and then they don't go that way. I'm super unhappy, and I try to get it that way. And I'm trying to get my nuggets that I can use at trial, so I can use it against them later. And this one though, this is way different because I'm asking questions, seeking to understand where people are coming from,
Yeah.
and it's actually been a fun process so far. So. And Glynis, you're a special one for me because you are the CEO of the Children's Receiving Home, which is very near and dear to my heart. The work that you do is so remarkable, and everybody who works at the receiving home is just so remarkable. It impresses me how the work that you do and how hard you work for definitely not enough money. And
Yeah.
but it's interesting because you I think to do what you do, you don't do it for the money, right? I
No,
mean,
you can't do it for the money.
right. It takes
You won't stay in the field.
right. It takes a very,
It's more of it's like a calling. It's really a
yeah,
calling.
yeah. That's what I've noticed. As I've worked with the receiving home now. I think it's been like 5 or 6 years. How long have you been the CEO now? 2, 3?
Two and a half.
2.5. And then you were right under the previous CEO for about a year or so?
Actually 2 years.
2 years. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And I
that
had
wasn't
worked at the receiving home prior to that and came back
right.
in
Right.
2018.
So you were old hat.
Yeah.
And but yeah, it's been I know I started working with the receiving home before you were in coming 2018, and I'd been there for a couple of years then, and it's
Yeah.
been really remarkable watching you work in the things that you've done in a pretty tumultuous time for the receiving home. So
Thank you. Thank
yeah,
you.
no, definitely. Well, let's start.
It takes a team,
Well,
as you mentioned.
you have a good team. I've been impressed with
Yes.
everybody you've worked with over there. It's been from the people who work in fund development and your accounting team. I work in the finance area with the board, and everybody's just working overtime all the time.
Hmm.
And everybody
Yeah.
really cares about the success of the home and the success of the kids, and
Absolutely.
it brings a there's not a lot of places where you can get faith in humanity anymore. and this is definitely one of them. So
Well,
um,
thank you. That means a lot because sometimes we don't always get the best press. So
no, no, that's true. That's
yeah,
true.
yeah.
And I really wish, hopefully through this podcast, people get an opportunity to really hear what it is that you do. I mean, so you started in social work, right?
I didn't.
Oh, where did you start? How did you get into this?
Funny story.
Okay.
I actually wanted to be a journalist
Interesting.
when I really started my college career, and then I had two wonderful English professors who basically told me I couldn't write. So, so bless them because then I started taking psychology classes,
Mm,
and then I wanted to be a school counselor
mm,
during a time when there were no jobs. But
mm.
I was young, and I said, you know what? I'm going to get a job anyway. Um, and I didn't. And I don't know how I ever got hired in my first social work job, but I do have my master's in counseling. I have a school counselor credential I never used. But I interviewed for a foster family agency, and I had always worked in a clinic where people came to you for counseling and services. And this was working in home. I'd never done this before in my life. I still can't believe they hired me. I had to do a role play. I had to come in, knock on the door, introduce myself. I'd never worked with foster kids per se. I had never worked in home. I still don't know how I got the job, but I guess it was kismet, because that put me on my track of doing social work and working with foster kids.
Wow.
For the rest of my career, basically.
Wow. So your first job then, you were actually going into foster homes?
Yes. Yeah, I was supporting foster families. Yeah.
Got it. So it was like a situation where you're going in to kind of just provide the support for new families or families that have been doing it for a long time and just checking on the kids?
Actually, both.
Oh,
Both.
okay.
So screening new families as well as checking on how families are doing. So that was my foray into foster care.
How long did you do that?
I did that for about 2 years. And then another agency asked me to start their foster family agency program, which I did. And just to be confusing, that was for the Sacramento Children's Home, commonly confused with the Children's Receiving Home. So I have both in my resume.
Nice.
And so I started a program for them, and that was in the early 90s. So it's been a while.
So you move over to the receiving home, or not the receiving home, but the children's home, which is another congregate care facility, right? Where kids are coming in.
And they were trying to start. Yeah, they were trying to start a foster family agency back then, and we just couldn't get it off the ground. So it ended up merging into another agency. And so they asked me if I wanted to start working in the residential treatment program and doing intake. And so that was kind of where I landed in residential treatment. And you kind of get hooked on these kids. Let me tell you, they're the toughest of the tough, but they're great kids. But one other fun fact is I wanted to make sure to share in talking about my history, because back when I was studying psychology, I was able to get extra credit by doing volunteerism. And so I actually volunteered at the Children's Receiving Home. And I ran the Point Store, which is the coveted spot that's a magical closet that the kids can earn points, and they can spend them on exciting things like makeup and cologne and toys and art supplies and all kinds of things. So my office right now is situated so I can still see the Point Store, because that always keeps me grounded as to where I started in all of this. So.
That's really cool. So going back to the foster families, what do you see is, I mean, you kind of hear, for some reason, when it comes to congregate care and even foster care, it gets a bad rap. Like there's and not necessarily for bad reason. Like, we know the percentages are not great for kids who end up there, and you hear, but it seems like you always hear nothing but bad stories. What, in your mind, as someone who's been on the ground, what makes a good foster family?
Oh, whoa. You have to be very flexible. You have to be very patient. You have to be willing to learn and go through all the training. You have to be open to criticism, because one thing, and learning, one of the things that foster kids are expert at is pulling out the worst in you, because that's how they survive. And so we have to train parents to not get upset about things that the foster kids do or say, because that's what they're doing to see if you're going to keep them around, because our kids they're like little mini movies that they're watching, just being rejected after rejection after rejection. And so they're going to do everything they can to see if you're going to be the next one to reject them. So you have to be really patient, really tolerant. And it's not about just loving kids. Unfortunately, I wish it was that easy, because they make it hard to love them.
Yeah. I heard your predecessor one time talk about the kids that come through the receiving home and I'm going to butcher it, but he said it so beautifully. He said, these kids are the hardest kids because they've been traumatized through no fault of their own, something of that nature, where they are the most difficult kids to deal with at no fault of their own.
Right.
And because what you're hearing here, what you do at the receiving home is that, I mean, these are kids that are emergency placements. I mean, they're taken from their home, they need a place to go, and for whatever reason, they can't go to a foster family. Is that right? For the most part?
Actually, over the course of the 78-year history, that was our primary population. Mm-hmm. But because of legislative reforms, the shelter program isn't really our primary focus at this point. Right. We are a mental health treatment program now and have been for about 16 years.
Sure.
So we don't get many emergency placements anymore. We used to. That used to be our niche. Yeah.
Right. And so, but now the kids that you're dealing with, they're higher acuity, right? Meaning
yes,
they're a little more difficult to deal with. Typically the kids that you're dealing with, and I always butcher the acronyms, STRTP and things of that nature. I know we're getting away from that now into some new acronym that the government folks have come up with.
The feds had to come up with.
Yeah, it changed the world. The kids that you're dealing with are kids that traditionally, for one reason or another, they're unable at the time to go to a foster family. Right. And so
they've basically failed foster placements, and there's no families available for them.
Mm-hmm. So you take them and try to rehabilitate them so that they are at some point either able to go home or go back to a foster family.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Ultimately, that's the goal.
Right. So those kids are no longer emergency placements, but they're placements because they or the system has failed. Either they have failed the system or the system has failed them, and you're there to kind of rehabilitate to hopefully make a fix.
Right. And do it in a really trauma-informed way, with lots of therapeutic services and supports. And the idea is to either work with their family if they have a family still attached to them, or to find a foster family that's now called resource families, just to,
right.
We got to keep mixing it up. Right. Or to find a resource family that will work with them while they're in treatment with us, so that then we can continue to follow them into the community when they return to a family setting. So ultimately, all of our kids want to be in a family, and ultimately we want them to be in a family. The hard part for group home care, we've gotten a bad reputation or rap over the years, because like you say, all you hear is the negative things about foster care, the negative things about group care. But the reality is we have a lot of successes, and we just have to figure out how to sing our praises better than what we've done in the past, because we have allowed that negative image of us. And I feel bad for the kids because, you talk about stigma. That's one of the biggest challenges that foster kids have, is they don't want people to know they're foster kids.
Sure.
And then add a layer onto that. They don't want people to know they're in a group home. And it used to be group homes had vans, you always know, oh, that's the group home kid, like the special ed bus, Right. So we've moved away. We have cars, and we try to do things so that we can normalize some of their life experiences. So that they want more than anything to be in a family and be normal like other kids.
I can tell you, it's interesting. My first experience with the receiving home is I was looking for a place to kind of do some service, and I called the home and I said, hey, I got a group of guys that like to play basketball. What do you think about us coming by weekly and playing basketball with the kids? And everyone was like, yeah, let's do it. And I know there's more rules now. It's a little more difficult to get a group of people on the campus just because of restrictions. But we came I remember the first week coming on there, and I was so impressed because the kids were such good kids. I mean, they really were. But But there was occasion where someone, and I know this in dealing with people in life that have mental health issues, at times when they get dysregulated or they they snap a little bit, and then you just got to ride the wave. And I was so impressed. I remember being on the basketball court, and there was a kid. He's about 17 years old, and he was a big dude. Like, he was not little. and he got angry, and the way that the staff, because the staff were playing too. In fact, there were times where just the staff and us playing, like, it got real competitive. But the staff handled it so beautifully. I was like, I don't know how they did that. You know what I mean? Like, how they did that. And it was just, so if anybody ever wants to say anything, but I remember we did that for a long time before COVID. And I remember saying that, I said, anybody ever wants to say anything bad about the receiving home, they need to get on there and see what those people do day in and day out for very, they're doing it, like you said, it's a calling. They're not doing it because they're getting paid well or anything like that. They're doing it because they sincerely love and understand, the kids.
Right.
So we're going back to foster care. One of the questions that came up, so I asked a bunch of people, I asked all the people on social media, I said, hey, why don't you give me some, anybody who has any questions? And one of the questions that came up, talking about foster homes and the bad rap that foster homes get, what would you say we could do to better vet foster homes?
That's a really good question, because I think that we do a good job in making every effort to prepare families to be foster parents. And we do training, and we give them all this opportunity to get experience. But when you're in the trenches, it's really different.
Right.
I had some amazing parents that I trained that had one kid who, started breaking things in their home and such. And then they're like, we're done. We're out.
Yeah.
Not going to tolerate it. So that's a really hard question to answer, because I think the people who do the best at foster care are the people who are in it kind of like a mission and a calling also.
Yeah.
And have done it for many, many years. I worked with one family who never adopted. And that was the other thing, is now the system is pushing for foster parents to adopt. And they never adopted, but they raised, over a course of probably 25 years, 13 kids. And they're all still in touch with them, and that they're still their family. Wow. And they didn't adopt them. That wasn't what they wanted to do, but those kids are their family and their kids, and they've gone to their weddings and their baby showers and, all of those things. So, so I don't know that I have an answer on how we could better prepare people. I really feel like it's just the human experience, and some people, are meant to do this work, and some people want to, but really don't have the fortitude, maybe it is, to tolerate. Because, we even have interns coming in to run groups, and they're like, these kids are cussing at us. And I'm like, yeah, that's what they do.
Yeah. Is that it?
So you got to get that skin. Yeah. And that's the hard part about trauma. Is that's where kids are going to test you. They're going to see, are you going to stick by them? Because this one family I worked with, they stuck by all these kids, and these kids were not easy. They were getting arrested, and they were breaking things, and they were running away, and the families stuck to them and said, we don't care. You're in our family. This is what families do. So I don't know if you can train that. It's got to be inside you.
It's funny because sometimes, when I have to hire a new staff member for my staff, and our work is hard, but it's not the same kind of hard as what you're doing. But, or even just like somebody who's, sometimes I mentor people who are going to go to law school, or even people who are like, hey, I'm about to have a kid, any advice? And I'm just like, you don't even know until you get there. Like, you can, when I interview when I interview new law clerks, even, I just go, please believe me, you do not understand how hard this job is. And they're like, oh, I'm good at hard things. I'm like, yeah, I'm sure you are. I'm sure you've had some hard things, but what we're doing here, you don't understand. And then they get there and they go, wow, you weren't joking. And it's just one of those things sometimes where you got to be there, it's just, and feel it and see if it's really for you. And man, much respect for the people who do that. I had a friend who they were doing foster care for a few years. And I was amazed that they could, because they had a number of times where they would have a kid come in and they were considering adopting the kids, and then their parents got the kids back, and it just, and that they built emotional ties to these kids, and then they go back to a situation that wasn't super ideal, and it was super hard. And I go, man, I can't imagine. You have to be a saint to be willing to do that. That's just shocking. So
so that's what we're looking for.
And
so people snap. I mean, I've had some really wonderful people that lashed out at kids and such that I would never have expected.
Sure.
But sadly, these kids and the trauma they've experienced, they know how to push your buttons.
Another story about the receiving home. We, as I mentioned, I'm on the board at the receiving home, and we at board meetings on occasion get to review the incident reports, because there's licensing requirements that things get reported when they happen. And I can remember one story in particular where a staff member, I believe she was female, got in an altercation with a kid, and a kid broke her nose, punched her right in the face. And she ended up going to the hospital and coming back on the same shift and finishing her shift.
Yeah.
And I was like, first of all, I don't know how, if a kid broke my nose, I don't know how I might be having a problem with going to jail myself, let alone.
Yeah, I was going to say, so you can understand how that happens. Yes.
Yeah. And I go, let alone coming back on shift. And I thought, man, these people are just so special to do that.
Yeah. And she's still here. So
that's awesome. How long has she been working there?
I'm trying to remember. I want to say maybe 14 years.
Wow, man.
Yeah.
14 years. That's awesome. So,
and she loves the overnight. She loves the overnight. So that's a special human also, because we have 24-hour awake care. And so to find people that don't sleep between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. is hard.
So tell me now, we've talked a lot about foster care. Now, what you do is different than, like you said, different than foster care. You do congregate care, which means it's kind of a group home setting.
Right.
Can you give us a sense, the listeners a sense, at what the youth, what are the issues that you are seeing that the youth that come through, the challenges that they face?
Okay. Most of the kids that we work with, because this is the population we work best with, have pretty significant trauma histories, abuse histories, have significant mental health issues, are being seen by our treating psychiatrists. Most all of them are on psychotropic medications, and they just want to be kids. So we're trying to help them learn how to be kids, as well as to be social and be appropriate. Many of them haven't been able to be successful at school. In fact, we were just talking about it. One of our kids currently, who was at a local public school, a middle school, and got into a fight with a group of girls, and our staff went to pick her up and sat in the principal's office while all the other parents picked their kids up and took them home. And she had to stay last, even though she wasn't the one who initiated the fight. And it was kind of like, we were talking about that. It's like, wow, here this kid just wants to be like a normal kid. And yes, she has anger issues, and she struggles with depression, and she struggles. We have a lot of kids that have suicidal suicidal ideation. They do a lot of cutting to help them relieve some of the pain and trauma that they've experienced. So, and that's actually who we work well with. They sound really scary kids, but they're just crying out for help, and they really want help, and they do well in our programs. And we have residential treatment. We also have a day program that keeps kids from going into the hospital. And the kids live at home, and then they're at our facility 5 to 10 days during the week.
So what kind of programs, what kind of services do the receiving home offer these kids while they're on campus?
So we have every day they have groups. They have a very structured day. And even when they're not going to school, we have our CRH school that we get them up and get them working on homeschooling kinds of things, so they have structure every day. They're provided with at least one individual therapy session. If there's a family involved, there's a weekly family session. There's daily groups that have everything to do from what to do when you're angry, to art therapy, to recreation. We also give them an opportunity to go on activities. They earn points throughout the whole day, every day that they can spend on either activities or, as I shared, my point store is still here. And the kids love the point store, especially the girls love the makeup. The boys like the cologne. I mean, that's, and some other kids like the toys.
Do you know what kind of cologne they've got there? I'm just super curious.
Axe.
Axe. Okay. All right. Nice. We might have to come in and educate them a little bit.
Yeah.
When you get out of this, when you get out of the receiving home, let's tell you what you really want. Yeah. Let's say, no, that's awesome. So, what I also found really interesting was at times on the board, we've had people who've come and served who were former residents.
Yes.
And so talk a little bit about that, how you see that some of these kids, because I mean, again, I kind of want to talk a little bit about what, talk about the challenges that the system faces, because there's a ton of them. I mean, when you hear about the percentages of kids who end up, I think it was, I can't remember the percentages, perhaps you could help me, but there's a large percentage of these kids that end up in the prison system. There's a large number of them that end up becoming victims of human trafficking. There's a large, drug abuse, mental health facilities. They all end up there. Go ahead.
The last census, I haven't heard the results of this last one, but the one prior, nationally, 51% of the homeless population were former foster youth.
Wow. 51%. That's so
51%.
Man. And so perhaps you can talk about how the receiving home serves to mitigate some of that risk.
Well, I wish I could make it all better. But I know that we have our limitations. So we take one kid at a time, and we try to impact, 1 or 2 children at a time. And really, by giving them the support, by supporting families that do want to reunify and get kids back together, by giving them coping skills. We do a lot of work around coping skills, what to do when you feel like you want to cut, when you feel like you want to run away, what can you do that's different so that you can be safe. But it's a long process. The foster kids in our program typically are in our treatment programs for like 1.5 to 2 years sometimes. Wow. Just because it's a really long process. But again, if you go back, Josh, to how they get to residential treatment, unfortunately, you have to fail your way up. So that means you have to fail and fail and fail and fail and fail to get treatment. And my hope in the time I've been involved in this field was to see that change, because it seems like, okay, if this kid has significant mental health issues, if they have a clinical diagnosis where they're on psychotropic medications, why do you keep putting them in foster homes? Why not put them in a treatment program for a year and work to a foster home? rather than you have to fail into treatment. And that's one of the biggest things I wish I could change in our system. And I don't think that's going to happen in my lifetime, unfortunately.
Yeah. Tell me, one of the questions that was asked, and I want to change it a little bit, is that what is a common strength kids build in the foster care system? But maybe we can.
Oh, I got that.
Okay. Tell us, what do you think?
They're very resilient.
Yeah, definitely.
They are amazing to me. Anytime I start to have a pity party about my life and my experiences, and then, I learn more about their experiences. And these are talented, wonderful kids who thrive and are artistic and are writers and are athletes. And, they have so much to offer. So I really feel like their greatest strength is their resiliency. And I don't know how they do it. So I get strength from them.
It's really interesting. I've shared this with my kids. Well, a couple of things that have come to mind when you were talking. I've shared with my kids how important, they don't have any struggles compared to the struggles of a kid who's coming through the receiving home's doors. But every challenge you face, you end up learning something that makes you a better human being, and being able to rise. There's something about being successful when you've seen some stuff, when you've been through some things. There's something about getting, there's something to be proud of. There's something about a success when you've had to go through what I sometimes call, if you've seen the Shawshank Redemption, like your own Shawshank, where you've had to crawl through the sewer for 500 yards to get to your freedom. And that's what I found so impressive is I found the best board members have been the ones who came through the doors, who came through the receiving home as a kid, and they are passionate about it, and they are successful people despite, and they're the people who I look at and I go, man, if they can do it, anyone can. Like if they can do it, there's always a chance that one of these children can become an amazing person. It's not just the statistic doesn't matter. 51% of people, you don't want that, but there's still 49% that are coming out and
that are successful.
Right? And we just want the numbers to get higher.
Yes.
And so
one of the really unique things about the Children's Receiving Home that I haven't found other places is the large alumni base that we have, and the passionate people that want to continue to give back and tell their stories is really amazing, because there's a lot of programs out there that people don't want to do that. And some it takes a little cultivating to before they're ready to share their story, because it's very personal. And a number of folks I've talked to are like, they were shamed. They were ashamed to be at the receiving home. They didn't want to tell anybody that they were there. And again, because they felt they did something wrong, even though it had nothing to do with them at all. That's what they carried with them. So I always feel like too, if I can reach out to alumni and have them at least tell me their story, I'm hoping to relieve some of the shame and to help them see that there's others that went through the same thing. And we're really lucky right now. We have 2 of our staff members are alumni. And they're really incredible, because one's a youth peer mentor, and he's working with the kids and, telling them, hey, I made it. You can make it too. So don't give up. Yeah, my family was all screwed up. And he even introduced a couple of us as his aunts. These are like my new aunts. These are my aunts in my adult life. So, so it's really nice. And we have another gal that was an alumni that works in our Supporting Community Connections, which is a suicide prevention program in the community. And she's an alumni. So she connects with a lot of young people who are alumni of the receiving home. So, we have a nice base.
Yeah, that's awesome. So another question that was asked, and I think this is a good question. What do you do to mitigate your own emotional burnout?
Hmm. That's a good question. I have an amazing support system. That's actually number one. My family's always supported my work. My husband is horribly supportive. He's the one that talked me into becoming CEO because I was like, I can't do that. He goes, why not? I'm like, I don't know.
Well, I can tell you that your husband was very he was very astute, because you've done a great job so far.
Oh,
You
well,
really
thank
have.
you. Thank you.
You know,
So
and this,
yeah, I think that's the biggest thing for me is the support. There's been times in my life I've had to compartmentalize what what has been happening around me, and I know that that's not healthy. So when I do that, I also have therapists in my life. Fortunately, I know a lot of good ones. So and sometimes I just buy them lunch.
yeah, you know, that's interesting too. You know, you talked about the stigma that I feel like it's getting better, but there's still a stigma out there about mental health.
Mm-hmm.
There really is. And you know, I can tell you, this is I'm one of them. I for a long time resisted the idea of worrying about mental health. It wasn't until I was in a car accident and had a concussion and had some residual symptoms that lasted a little while that I started realizing that you know, it is something that you need to be cognizant of. It's not, you know, you don't just shake it off, that there are some things that you really do need to unpack and figure out. Um, so how do we shake this stigma? I mean, obviously I'm not asking Glynis Butler-Stone, how are you going to fix all of the issues the world has with mental health?
Yeah.
Have you seen over the course of your time that the stigma has gotten a little bit better, or do you feel like it's still the same? What do you think we need to do to kind of get past that?
Well, that's a really great question, because the fact that there's more awareness about it, thanks to a lot of these athletes that are coming out, a lot of people are talking about mental health issues that never talked about it before. I can't say in my work that I've seen a huge shift other than, you know, the political things and on TV and, you know, the athletes coming out and such. But I you know, as far as our kids and the boots on the ground, I don't, and even the families have a real struggle coming into treatment with their kid, because a lot of times they'll just say, here, fix them.
Yeah.
And so it's like, no, it's a family system, and you have to be willing to be vulnerable, and you have to be willing to talk about your stuff.
Yeah.
And so from where I sit, I don't see a lot of change. If anything, I feel like in some respects it's gotten worse.
Yeah. You know, and the kids that you're dealing with, I mean, I've had some, you know, I think we all, I tell my kids all the time, I'm like, don't worry, I'll pay for your therapy. It's fine. You know, cause we all have, I'm sure we all have trauma from our childhoods, but man, to think about them having, you know, the kids that come through there and the things that they've seen from people that are supposed to protect them and things from people who are supposed to love them.
And I think that's where I learned the most about myself. Was I did intake for the residential program at the children's home for about 2 years. And reading all of these packets, I always make sure that our admissions people and our intake folks get lots of mental health time and lots of support, because some of the things you read, I mean, it's just worse than any movie you've ever seen. It's just awful, the things people have done to their kids. And so I loved that job. That was actually one of my favorite jobs that I had in my career, but I hated reading all the papers and all the history and the trauma and the actual graphic nature of things that were done to kids.
How do you, so I can just tell a story from my life. I thought that I wanted to be a prosecutor, and and I spent a very short amount of time dealing with domestic violence, and very short, like less than a summer. And I went in there, and one of the things, the reasons why I said I don't want to do this was because of how, I'll put it this way. I remember one time I was going to do a pretrial hearing for a woman who had been beaten by her, I can't remember if it was her husband or boyfriend, but it was someone she'd been with for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And she came in, and it was the day of the pretrial hearing, and I was going to get her testimony. And she came in and she just said, I'm going to recant. It was all a mistake. And I tried so hard. Someone find that transcript. I worked hard trying to get that info out, and she wasn't going to have it. And the thing that shocked me was that one of the investigators, or one of the other attorneys who dealt with it, he goes, yeah. And he just so nonchalantly said, yeah, you know what? Eventually he'll probably kill her and we'll get her for murder. And I was like, man, the way he said that, I said, I never want to be that jaded. I never want to be that jaded, where I could say something like that with a straight face and it not even faze me. When you're reading all those things, when you're reading the stories of these kids, I mean, I couldn't imagine. I have a good friend right now who's a prosecutor who deals specifically in child abuse. And let me tell you, I don't know how he does it. I mean, how do you do that and not just lose your faith in humanity?
That's where you compartmentalize, and it's not healthy. So that's why you need a good therapist and a good support system. And I exercise and, try to do things that give me joy and fill my cup, because you have to keep your cup full to go back in again. And I only did that for about 2 years and really don't read many referral packets anymore. So
sure.
But I appreciate the people who do.
Mm-hmm. What's the turnover like for an intake person? Is it pretty?
Well, yeah, it's a 1 or 2 year deal for most organizations. We're really lucky. One of our current intake person has been here 14 years. Oh, wow. She's done a variety of jobs, but she's done intake for me and a little before, probably at least 5 or 6 years.
Wow.
So,
I got to imagine that having the alumni base, when you get back and you see somebody, I don't want to name any names just because their personal lives and their personal stories, but when you hear these people come back and they're successful, that's got to help. That's gotta help you,
Yeah, absolutely. And there's one former board member that I think of every year on Christmas, because she told her story about this was the first safe place she had been at, and that her and her sister were horrifically sexually abused. And she was actually removed, I think she was in 8th grade, if I'm not mistaken, from PE right before Christmas, like Christmas Eve or the day before Christmas Eve, and came here. And the kids made her bracelets and they welcomed her here. And it was the first time in her life she felt safe. Yeah. And I think of her every Christmas, because I can't even imagine. Can you imagine? No. I mean, Christmas is already traumatic for most of us anyway. Just regular family stuff. I don't know about you, Josh, but it is for me. Everybody's best really comes out at Christmas. But to have that kind of a memory, and so she always has come back and volunteered to take in gifts and such on Christmas, because that was like this new day for her. It was really powerful story for me.
Yeah, I remember that one too. There wasn't a dry eye in the building when she shared her story. Another one I remember, I think it might have been the same person, or it might have been someone different, who said coming to the receiving home was the first time that anyone had ever brushed her hair. Oh. And I just was like, my goodness. Yeah. I mean, just to think about these kids who, again, no fault of their own, are in these traumatic circumstances. Right. Right. We're sitting here, and I mean, people complain about not having enough ice in their iced coffee. You know what I mean? And then you've got a kid like that who, who's dealt with those types of things. Yeah. And so, man, that's just, it's really
remarkable. They're resilient, Josh.
It's remarkable that 49% of them
Yes.
can become, you know, can become functional members of society.
Yeah.
You know, it really is. Now, so if you had a magic wand, Glynis,
Okay.
and you could just change anything about the system that you've been dealing with, and how many years now you've been in the system?
Oh, a long time.
Yeah. I won't age you. I won't
30
age you.
plus. We'll say 30 plus.
30 plus. Okay. So 30 plus years. If you
Probably
could,
closer to 40, but it's 30 plus.
if you could wave the wand um, and change something about the system, what do you think you would change?
Well, ultimately, I wish we didn't need it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wish that all children were born into families that cared for them and nurtured them and saw their greatness and potential, that weren't involved in drugs and mental illness and such. So that would be my ultimate, is that we don't. And that was always when I started this work, I thought, okay, I'm going to work myself out of a job, because if we keep helping kids, they won't need us anymore. And that would be amazing.
Do you think over the course of the last 30 years, do you think that there is more of a need now for the system, less of a need, the same a need? What do you see?
It feels like more of a need, but I think it's just because I'm born and raised in Sacramento, so this is my hometown, and I know more and more people are moving in here. So the numbers of kids being removed, the number of kids needing services is just going up. So I don't know if it's a product of just more people in this area than previously, or if the number of kids needing care has grown, or if it gets back to people are now being more aware of mental health issues.
Is there a certain demographic that you see being serviced? Like, I remember when I walked through the first time, because I did a tour the first time, and I spoke with one of the main counselors there, and I asked him, I said, how many of the kids on campus are coming from two-parent homes? And he was like, oh, like none of them, you know. And I said, well, what are you seeing? He goes, I would say probably like 96-97% are coming from fatherless homes. Is that what you're seeing? Are you seeing a certain group? Is there a certain I know that we're serving more LGBT kids.
Yes. And I would say now that the past 5 years, as we've shifted away from the emergency shelter to residential treatment, we're definitely seeing more two-parent families than we saw as the shelter. So we are seeing more two-parent families. They're just different demographics of parents than we had previously. So, same-sex parents and such are a little bit more common as well.
Interesting.
And the other thing that I just want to share, because I left the receiving home in 2011 because I wanted to learn more about adoption, and I work for an adoption agency. And one of the hardest things for me is because adoption's little dirty secret is that a lot of people give their kids back, and they do that via residential treatment programs. So we have a lot of adopted kids that we're working with in our program now. So they have the trauma of being foster kids, being adopted, and then you have that extra layer of now their adoptive parents are struggling if they still want them.
Wow. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think because they may adopt them when they're little and they're more manageable and they're cute and cuddly. And then they start to hit latency age. You start to hit 8, 9, 10. And then the teenage years and such. And so, their trauma histories don't go away. And so a lot of times they're not in therapy, or they never had therapy. They have attachment issues. I've worked with a number of kids who are adopted, and they're adopted by amazing people who love them to death and would give them everything. But the core thing is that somebody gave them away. And it's usually, why did my mother give me away? Mm. And even the most, I know I have several friends who have adopted kids, and we've had conversations about this. It's like, it's, imagine I don't think you're adopted, Josh, but if you are, I'm not. And I can't imagine that question mark of, why did your mom give you away? Yeah. Why didn't your parent, especially your mom, why didn't your parents fight for you? Why didn't they want you? So it's like this ultimate rejection.
Sure.
So, and that carries even with the healthiest kids and young adults, it still pops up every once in a while. It's kind of like, but why? Right. And they'll never know.
Yeah, man. So when you're saying, when you refer to a lot of the kids who are adopted or given back, you're talking with like foster kids that were adopted and then given back.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that you're seeing a lot of same-sex parents come through with kids. Is that a similar thing? Like they're just a group that is kind of fostering kids and adopting, or is it?
Yes.
So,
yes.
Okay. So the reason you're seeing that is because same-sex couples tend to be adopters of foster kids, right, and they are struggling because the kids were traumatized.
Right.
Before.
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So the family dynamics, the family systems are definitely different from the shelter to the treatment program.
Yeah. Right. Do you see, well, let's talk about that a little bit, because that was one of the questions that came up. Like I said to you before we went on there, we have a very educated group that were asking questions. One of the questions that was asked were and I kind of know the answer to this because I've been involved since it happened, but continuum of care reform. Now that there's reform and that California is kind of moving away from shelter care and congregate care, what are some of the issues that the receiving home is facing?
Oh, let me get started on that. So
we can do a whole hour on that. One more board meeting. We've been talking about this for a while.
Well, the intention of the legislation was really a good one because, again, kids deserve to be in families. Our child welfare system 40 years ago, kids would come into a group home setting at, say, 6 years of age, and they'd emancipate out at 18. The only people they knew were the staff, and the staff changed. They lost contact with family. And those were the kids that landed homeless, incarcerated, and a lot of times deceased, because you really do need that family connection. So there needed to be some reform. The problem is, I think they've gone too far one way, and the federal government has encouraged it. The state and the local is encouraging the movement away from congregate care completely, rather than seeing that you need a whole continuum. They're saying it's a continuum of care, but you need families, and you need special families for these kids that have complex trauma issues. And you have to have families that are going to not give up on these kids when they punch them in the face, or they break their favorite television, or they steal their car, or they hurt one of their kids. Those are the kids that we need foster homes for, but we can't find them. So then those kids fail up, as I said, they have to fail several times to get to treatment. And then at that point, they've got all these layers of trauma and all these rejections on top of it that we have to work through in a short period of time to hopefully restore some of that so they can move back to a family setting. So ultimately, it was AB 403 that was going to save child welfare in California. And there was going to be plenty of families, and all the families were going to take the kids, and there was going to be this treatment level of foster care. And we were going to get rid of group homes altogether. We got rid of shelters. We're just, group homes are bad. Kids' outcomes are bad in group homes. And unfortunately, there's not enough families. And unfortunately, there's not families that'll take these kids that have so much trauma and need really intensive mental health treatment services, and need intense, like every day has to be structured, and they have to have groups, and they, really need to work through all of their issues so they can be productive. So the idea was good. But there's also gaps. I think one of the other things, Josh, that you were referring to, you've heard about, we had this rate classification system. So you had like 10 levels of group homes. And now what they've done is they've put it all into one level of group home, which is the high level. So there's nothing in between a foster home, really. And there's no therapeutic foster homes. There are very few. And then you've got these kids who really probably don't need to be in this really high level of care, but there's nowhere for them to go. And so the argument has been kids learn bad behavior by being around other kids that are doing bad behavior. So now we've wiped out all this middle ground for some of these kids who might have been successful at a lower level of care. And we put them in this really high level of care with these kids that are really, really traumatized and are acting out. And they probably are learning more bad behaviors, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So, my hope is at some point, somebody will say, wait a minute, we need to really look at building a couple of layers more of care, because we just don't have it. So kids who fail out of our program have nowhere to go other than the hospital.
Yeah.
So we're missing some of the gaps as far as services go for kids in foster care.
So how do we fix that? What is it? Let's say someone's listening to this and they go, man, that's not right. What do I do? How can I help? Do they contact their local senator, or what would you recommend they do?
Well, if you do have, a senator or an assemblyman, we're actually starting to do some legislative advocacy work in addition to our state association to get the word out about the good things that group care does. We don't want kids to grow up in group care. We agree they all need to be in families, but there's going to be times that kids don't have the control over their regulations, they're dysregulated, or they have too much trauma or anger. And we need to work through that in therapy with them to be able to live in the community and be productive. So if you have connections, definitely speak to your assembly members and Senate members. The other thing is, I can do a little bit of a pitch for fundraising, because the other thing that we don't have is enough money, because the other part of this continuum of care is they capped the amount of money that we receive for our residential treatment. We get like little 6% increase last year, and they said, oh, isn't that great? Well, inflation was 8%. So yeah, that was great. And, and the cost of everything has gone up. We're a nonprofit, so we can't pay our staff. So I won't get on that soapbox too hard here, but definitely if people want to help, we always are looking for donations, whether it be in kind, gift cards, and monetary donations to help, supplement the things, because we do a lot of fundraising. We raise over $600,000 a year just to barely make ends meet as far as caring for these kids, because they're way more expensive than what we're being reimbursed by the government.
That has been something that has, as I've worked on the board, that has really blown my mind, has been how the government expects you to do so much with so little.
Yep.
And they look at you, and I've seen it. They look at you and you go, hey, I can't afford to take care of this kid. And they just expect you to do it. And then there's no rhyme or reason for their increases, if at all.
Right.
And then they look at you, and then you're going out and looking for other resources. I know there's been some commercial carriers that we've started to, work with, like Kaiser and different places, and we're having good outcomes with them, but they're paying, you sit there, and then they get mad. They go, well, wait a minute, how come you're taking, those are our beds? And you're like, well, you're not paying for your beds. You're not paying for the stuff this is something that really, I have been incredibly frustrated in my time, is that these government policy wonks who've never even set foot probably I mean, here I know a lot of the local guys here, the local what do you call them, council members have come on and taken a tour, but they don't really understand that you're sitting there and they're asking you when you're explaining to them, listen, I can't afford, like we can't afford to pay the people, we can't afford to feed the kids, we can't afford to give them the services that they need. We're going out and we're asking people from the community to come on here and give us money because you won't give it to us. We pay tax dollars I mean, these are the people, listen, the government is supposed to protect those, right? They're there for some security. That's what they say when they're taking away our liberty. It's all about security.
Yeah.
This group of kids. These are the most vulnerable children in Sacramento County. They're the most vulnerable people. We're talking. These are the people who are going to end up in that homeless camp. They're the kids that are going to end up on the streets in human trafficking. They're going to end up in our prisons, and they won't pay. They won't pay the money to make sure that these kids are taken care of. It's mind blowing.
Right. And that's unfortunately the group care, they're trying to get rid of it. So one way to get rid of it is you don't pay for it. And sadly, in our region, I think we used to have about 15 different group care providers, and we're down to just 5 of us that are left in the region.
I've heard these numbers before, but I haven't had them updated. How many children are there in the foster care system just in Sacramento County?
Right now there's 1,300.
Okay. And how many foster families are there in Sacramento County?
Well, I don't know how many foster families, but I can tell you that I pulled my data for you here. Right now there's 208 kids in foster homes.
So there's 1,300 kids in the foster care system and only 200 are in foster homes.
Yes.
And where are the rest?
But the cool part, the good part, I'll go back to the AB 403. The good part is that the legislation made it so that relatives and grandparents can, what they call non-related extended family members, like a coach or a teacher or a neighbor, can now also receive the same benefits that a foster parent can.
Oh, that's
so
great.
That was really cool. That was a really good part. That was one way they were going to create all these families. So I worked with a lot of grandparents that couldn't get their kids because they couldn't afford the rent to get a bigger apartment. And they desperately wanted their grandkids. So that was one of the good pieces about AB 403. So right now in Sacramento, there's 320 kids that are with relatives.
Okay.
And there's 315 that are in guardianship placement. So the good news is they've got, 46% of their population in relatives or guardian care.
Got it. And then they've got 200 kids in foster care.
Right.
And then how many are in congregate care?
64.
64. So I wasn't following the math, but that didn't sound like 1,300. Where do the rest of them go?
The rest, they have some non-foster care placements. They have some that are kids that are 18 or older that are in what they're calling transitional housing placements. And then the one that gets me every time is most recent numbers for Sacramento County is they have 103 kids that are not in placement. And what that means is they either are AWOL from the system, or they don't know where they are, or they are in the intake office trying to find placement for them.
Wow.
And it just breaks my heart that they see congregate care as such a bad thing, because we have 64 kids in congregate care and 103 that aren't in placement at all.
Wow.
And that's seen as a success, unfortunately.
Man. So wanted to ask you a couple of questions about yourself. We've talked a lot about the foster care system, and I can tell you, like I said, I mean, it's all doom and gloom a little bit, but at the same time, it's not. There are a lot of kids out there who have successfully made it through the system, and I've seen it. I mean, I've seen it through working on the board. I've seen so many of them that have come out and actually become very incredibly productive members of society and are giving back, and that's awesome.
Mhm.
But what do you think? What is it that drives you to do this work?
Well, my glib answer is I must be crazy.
Glutton for punishment, for sure.
Just like, and I actually I've been one that I love challenges. So and again, when I started all of this, I really had hoped to see changes in our system, and I'd really hoped to be able to make a difference for kids and families. And I think what really drives me is I'm stubborn, and so I don't give up. And I feel like these kids don't give up, and that we can't give up for them. So so yeah, I think that's what probably drives me is, and I'm probably a little crazy, but
when you say you don't give up, what do you mean by that? Are you meaning like you don't give up in that you still believe that you can make a difference, or you?
Yes,
okay.
yes, right. Yes. I still believe I can make a difference. I still believe that we can hopefully challenge some of these reform efforts that aren't good for kids, because it's not good for kids. You should, if you have a continuum of care, you should have all care available, and kids should be able to go into care at whatever time they need to. They shouldn't have to fail 5 or 6 or 12 foster placements before they get treatment. So yeah, that's kind of what keeps me going every day. And again, the resiliency of these kids is pretty incredible. So that does fill my cup too. Is we have more successes than failures, and so that's what I would love to scream to the hilltops, is that we have more successes than failures.
Can you think of what would you say in your 30 plus years? What would you say is your biggest success? And that could be a story, or it could just be your own personal, like, what would you say is your biggest success in life?
Wow. I have several. Yeah. I think right now I'm going to go with the in the moment and what comes to mind first. I have a kid that's a really great success story that touched me, and I will never forget. And I'm hoping she's out there and okay, because this was a kid I worked with. She's probably 30 years old now. And she had severe psychosis. She was a really difficult kid, had terribly, horrifically abused by her family. I worked with her when she was in foster care. She would have delusions, and she'd take off all her clothes and sit out in the front lawn. I mean, really, really a difficult kid. Fast forward through therapy and treatment, she is thriving. She's a good mom. She got married. I mean, I'm so proud of her. I haven't seen her in about 7 years. So this is one thing I was going to share, Josh, is that it's really hard in this work, because a lot of times you don't know whatever happens to these kids, or as they become young adults, you'll never know. And you have to be okay with that. But she sought me out several times. So I'm hoping maybe she's out there somewhere. And she was actually going for her master's in social work. And so I think of kids, she's one I'm really, really proud of. That's awesome. And she came out of a really horrific situation to thrive. So as far as organizationally, I just have to say that I know we're still turning what I call our Princess Cruise Liner at the Children's Receiving Home. We're pointing this way. We're trying to get it going this way. So I feel pretty successful at the last 2 years, getting through the pandemic, that one that was supposed to be over in June of 2020.
Right. Right. Initially, it was 2 weeks.
You know,
2 weeks to slow the
yeah,
curve,
it was,
to bend the curve. Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
So as far as professionally, I really feel like this has been one of my proudest accomplishments, that we're still here. And not to share a lot of insider stuff, but there was a chance we weren't going to be. So I feel really successful that I have a team of people that have hung in there with me and have stayed, and that we're slowly clawing our way back, because we can't give up. These kids need us.
Yeah.
And without agencies like us, these kids would be placed out of county, they'd be placed out of state. And as you get them farther away from their families and their communities, they're not coming back, and they're not going to be successful.
Right.
Because we all need our family, whether we like them all the time or not. We all need them.
It's true. It's true. And I think it's important for people out there. Well, real quick before I get into the little story there, story mode. I can't remember the exact percentage, but it's incredibly impressive. What percentage of the money that CRH generates actually goes into programs? It was, I remember the audit came through and they talked about how exceptional the percentage was of not going to staff, not going to administration, but actually going to the programs. Do you remember what it was?
It's right around 85%.
Yeah, which is exceptional for a nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them are much higher. And, the thing that I think is so important for people who are listening, one of the things that I have tried, and part of the reasons why I got into the receiving home, I don't know why, I lived in Carmichael, I grew up in Carmichael, and I was always aware of the receiving home. I didn't have a lot of interaction with it at all as a youth or anything like that. But I always felt like I was like, man, I really want to be a part of that. And I, work with the receiving home. And I think that part of the reason for that is that I have been very lucky in my life. I mean, my story is I would consider somewhat, everybody's got trauma of some sort in their lives. Mm-hmm. But I know my kids have really grown up on the A side of life. They've had a lot of advantages. And when you have the advantages, think about the advantages of, my kids are blessed in that they're never going to need to worry about where their next meal is coming from. They're never going to worry about where whether they're going to have a place to sleep. That's a very real concern for the kids that come through the receiving home.
Yep.
My kids are never going to have to worry as to whether their parents love them.
Yep.
That's a very real concern for the kids who come to the receiving home. And I think as a part of a community, when you have been blessed to be on the A side of life, it's important that you give back, and you give to those who who through no fault of their own lost the birth lottery,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I hope that, people who are listening to this take an opportunity to at least take a tour, of the receiving home and see
mm-hmm.
what they can do to maybe help, whether it be monetarily, whether it be volunteering, or whether it be just getting the word out and friending them on Facebook and sharing some of the stuff that goes on. That's a big thing too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I concur, because I know I was very lucky.
Yeah.
And I won the birth lottery also. So,
right.
And my first exposure to kids in foster care was really when I did the Point Store in college, because it was like, I didn't grow up around any kids that I knew of were in foster care. And so, but there was a lot of stuff going on behind closed doors that nobody was talking about too. So,
yeah. Isn't that interesting? I have been surprised in my life, and I think this is super important just in general in life. It's always the last person you think. I don't know how many times, you look at a family, especially like I'm religious, I go to church, everybody puts on their Sunday best and they all look like they're super happy. And the next thing you know, boom, something something, you weren't expecting happens. And it's important to remember that when you're running into people, when you're talking to people, even if there's strangers in the grocery store, everyone's fighting a war within their own mind that you know nothing about. And so real important to make, to try and be kind, to be kind to people. And so, okay. So I asked you about your biggest success. So what would you say is your biggest failure, and what did you learn from it?
Oh, goodness. Because you did sort of warn me about that question. So I was thinking about it, and it's like, wow, my biggest failure. And I've worked with a couple of kids that that are no longer on this planet, sadly. And so that feels like a failure, even if there was nothing I could really do about the situation. But I guess I went more to the child welfare side of the world. I feel like my biggest failure is in my lifetime so far, we haven't made much of a change. I don't think we've made much of a change. I think we're just the hamster in the wheel. And
we do you mean
we're always we, the collective we.
Yeah. So you mean we as a society?
Yeah, we as a society, not me as a human. I feel like I've tried, but I feel like we haven't built a good system for our kids. We just haven't done it yet. And hear this great reform and kids going to families. Okay, well, parts of it, like the kids going to their kin and getting the same benefits that foster kids got, that's fabulous. What about the other half of the kids? That's what I feel like, the collective we still got work to do.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you something just to kind of maybe chew on that. I'm a very religious person, and you may, believe that this person is real or not. But I think about, when you say something like that, I think about Abraham. And if you're religious, you know that Abraham is the story of Abraham, one of the stories of Abraham. I mean, he's the father of everything when it comes to Jews and Muslims and all of that. But the thing about Abraham that I found really interesting was that he desperately wanted to have a big family, and he couldn't. And so much that his wife, Sarai, who later became Sarah, was very old, and he didn't think that she was going to bear him a child. And so that's when he took on a second, I don't know if you call it a wife or concubine, whatever you want to call it, named Hagar, which gave birth to Ishmael. And he later had Isaac with Sarah. And, there's a whole complicated story, depending on who you're talking to, of who got the birthright and all those things. But I think about that because I think about Abraham really, really wanted a big family, and he was promised a big family, but it wasn't until after he passed away that happened. And so sometimes the things that we want, the things that we need, the things that we are hoping for, you may not see
it.
You may not even see it in your lifetime. For all you know, Glynis, those people who you never see again have all become amazing people.
Yep.
Maybe not all of them, but a bunch of them have become amazing people, and you may not know it.
Yeah.
Who knows? You maybe not know it in this lifetime at all, but you've definitely made a difference.
Yeah, that's what I hold in my heart. I'm hoping.
So sometimes I learned this. My boss, who's been my mentor, he said something to me, because I remember having a particularly ungrateful client one time, and I had done a fantastic job for this client. Like, I was shocked, right? And when they were not excited about it, I was like really floored, because I'm like, do you understand? I have a little bit of a healthy ego. I was like, do you understand how brilliant the lawyering was in this case? Like, I'm not, and he just would not concede. And my boss said to me, he goes, sometimes you're going to have clients that are not going to truly understand what you've done for them. And you have to be okay with knowing that that you did a good job. And so I can tell you personally, Glynis, that I know you've done a good job. At least for the time I've known you, you've done a great job.
Oh, thank you.
So one question I want to ask everybody, some people don't like this question because they don't like thinking about it. But one day we're all going to pass away, and we're going to have a funeral. And when you pass away, traditionally here in America, when someone passes away, most, Judeo-Christian funerals, there's a eulogy. Someone's going to give it for Glynis Butler-Stone. And if you could choose the one thing that someone would say about you in your eulogy, what would you want them to say?
Only one?
No, if you got a couple of them, but I'm thinking if it was like, I want to know what Glynis hopes that when she walks away, when she takes her last breath, that people would say about you.
I know it's been said before, and there's several people who have claimed it, but I really want people not to so much remember what I said, but how I made them feel. And that's really important to me, is I want people to know that I cared about them, that I cared about the greater good, and that hopefully I made people feel good about themselves.
Definitely. That's really awesome. Well, okay, so we've been going for almost an hour and a half. I'd say for your first podcast, you did a really great job. So
yay!
I want you to give a final pitch. If there are people out there who are listening to this and they say, hey, listen, receiving home, I really want to get involved. I want to be, whether it be volunteering or whatever, what would you say they need to do?
Okay. Well, the holidays are coming, so we can always use volunteers. We're going to open our lobby back up again and accept gifts of people who are interested. I don't know if we're going to have the Angels program or what program this year, but you can select a kid and purchase gift items for them for the Christmas season. We also have opportunities. Right now we have a pumpkin patch going on, depending on when this airs in Old Sacramento. You can either purchase pumpkins or volunteer.
Where's the pumpkin patch?
It's in Old Sacramento by the old schoolhouse on Front Street, I guess it is. So nice. It's open the next 2 weekends, Friday through Sunday, like noon to 6.
Cool.
So anyway, watch our website, watch our social media, because there's lots of opportunities that you can give back. We're bringing activities and events back. Hopefully, we've kind of been dormant with this doggone pandemic that's now supposedly gone. So we're done with that.
Sounds more like it feels more like a cold now.
Yeah. And it used to be that you could come and volunteer with the kids, but there's so many laws and rules and regulations that it's really difficult to do that. But anything you can do to help support our kids, whether it's in kind or monetarily or volunteering at an event, would be a huge support. And spreading the word about the wonderful work that the Receiving Home does, that group care is an important part of the continuum of care. It's not the final stop. It's not, a bad place. Kids get well here, they heal, and then they can move back to families and they can go on to be successful adults. So we're as equally important in the continuum as foster parents are.
Awesome. Well, excellent. Well, this has been great. And Glynis, thanks for stopping by. Hopefully, we can have you back and we can talk more. And so appreciate it. Thanks for listening. And we'll see you guys next time.
Okay. Thank you.